Awful quiet in here. Good morning, everybody. Danny has that virus of which we will not name. So he won't be facilitating the class this morning, so I was asked to do it. I'm happy to do it. We're in the book of 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel. And this is, 2 Samuel shows the transition for David as he becomes the king of Israel and all the problems that he has after that throughout all of his whole king. The entire time he's a king, he has one thing or another. There are years of good and prosperity, and then there are also years where not so good, and we'll go over all those things. But just to summarize, 1 Samuel really quick is kind of the end of the judge era where God has judges who are directing Israel on how to live and where to go, that kind of thing. Samuel's a priest, he's a judge. Israel asks for the king. God doesn't like the way they ask. So he selects Saul. Eventually Saul is rejected by God. David is anointed while Saul is still king. David kills Goliath. Saul takes notice of David and is very much afraid of David because he knows that David is preferred by God and pursues him continually, constantly going after him. David does a bunch of kooky things to elude Saul, and it really shows the providence of God a lot as to him protecting David. David joins the enemy for a time, and just to get away from Saul's pursuit. We saw just recently how that created a lot of difficulty for David. And in the last part of 1 Samuel, Saul and his three of his sons die, including Jonathan. And of course, we'll be talking about that today, about the effect that it has on David. In 2 Samuel, we're going to see the life of David, essentially. And David reigns in those first 5 chapters. It is established in those first 5 chapters, which is to say, for the first couple of years, there's basically a civil war. And 6 through 7, we see that the focus, now that David has a united kingdom, the focus is back on God. We see that even in chapter 2, and we'll talk about that maybe today. The ark is returned to Israel. David asks God he tells God, I'm going to build the temple. And of course, God says, no, you're not going to. But God does make a covenant with David, and that is an extraordinarily important thing, not only for Israel, but for David personally and for the world as a whole, because all the promises will come through the lineage of David, which is what all of this is about. If that didn't happen, we wouldn't be here together. Chapters 8 through 12, we see David's kingdom growing. He's strengthened, and then the incident with Bathsheba happens, and all the issues after that we see documented. It's very much like 1 Samuel. The first half of 1 Samuel is pretty good. And you see Saul coming in and things are looking pretty good. Then he sins and everything falls apart. Pretty much the same for 2 Samuel. Things are looking pretty good for David. And then the sin with Bathsheba happens. And by that time, his sons are old enough to sin against their own father. And we see trouble from within his own household. Amnon, the issue with Amnon and Absalom happens. Absalom tries to have his dad dethroned. He tries to have him essentially killed and becomes his enemy. And we see another revolution happen from the tribe of Benjamin with this guy named Sheba. So people aren't happy with David. And it's really kind of another mirror of 1 Samuel, where you find sin having its repercussions later on the nation. And then 21 through 24, we'll see the final conflicts that David has and this final strengthening that he does have after his repentance from his sin. But then he orders a census, and that God is not happy about that. So that's quick, just very quick overview of what we're going to see. And last week, David finds out that Saul and 3 of his sons were killed. And we're going to get into that. And then we're going to get into this powerful, how do I describe it? Extremely passionate, emotionally driven song that David, it's a dirge that he basically sings. It's just a way of mourning. And it really opens up the character of David and who he is and what drives him and what he thinks about. And it's important for us, I think, to understand David at that level, because this is who David is. Does he mess up? Of course he messes up. Everybody messes up. If we don't understand that, then we need to study the scriptures more. But David is driven, and there's the things that drive David is what God likes about David. So before we start, let's have a word of prayer. Our gracious Father, we are so thankful, Lord, that we could be here together, that your Son draws us here together as a church and as a family, and we're thankful for your word, and that for us it is the most valuable thing we can have in our lives. And we hope and pray that all things we do at this moment would be agreeable to you. In Christ's name, amen. Okay, so last week, verses 1 through 16, this Amalekite comes and tells David that he killed the king. Did that happen that way?
Not according to First Chronicles.
Yeah, not according to First Chronicles, and really, even First Samuel doesn't really read that way. So he just is trying to take the glory for it, in my opinion, and probably thinks he's going to endear himself to David for, killing the king. And so what does David do? He has him executed. Why does David have him executed?
Does he kill the anointed?
Okay, he says, why would you think it's okay to kill God's anointed? That's the reasoning behind it. And he even makes a statement that, this is a righteous thing to do, executing you, because you killed God's anointed. And that, along with so many other things that we read about David, I think points out his worldview of Israel. Everything he does is, what does God want for Israel? He's looking at Israel as a whole. He's looking at it, what good can we do for Israel? How can God's name be glorified through Israel? He really is this foreshadowing of the Christ. We talk about that all the time. Okay, so we're going to get into David's lament over Saul and Jonathan. And at some point, we're going to go back and read a little bit about Jonathan, I think, and David, and so we can be reminded of why he's doing this. And so I'm going to read through this, and my first question is, what is the book of Jashar? And then in verse 19, this poetic statement is repeated 2 more times. What does it mean? How have the mighty fallen, is what David says. And what do we learn about David? So chapter 1, starting at verse 17. Now I'm going to put inflection in this, because this is the way David would have done it. Then David chanted with this lament over Saul and Jonathan his son, and he told them to teach the sons of Judah the song of the bow. Behold, it is written in the book of Jashar. Your beauty, O Israel, is slain on your high places. How have the mighty fallen? Tell it not in Gath. Proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon. Or the daughters of the Philistines will rejoice. The daughters of the uncircumcised will exult. O mountains of Gilboa, let not dew or rain be on you, nor fields or of offerings. For there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul, not anointed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, and the sword of Saul did not return empty. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and pleasant in their life, and in their death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul. Who clothed you luxuriously in scarlet? Who put ornaments of gold on your apparel? How have the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle? Jonathan is slain on your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You have been very pleasant to me. Your love to me was more wonderful than the love of women. How have the mighty fallen and the weapons of war perished? Okay, so David is obviously very emotionally driven, in my opinion, when he's writing this. This is very personal on multiple levels for him. Does he hate Saul? Saul pursued him for years and years trying to kill him. Does he hate Saul? No, he doesn't hate Saul. Why doesn't he hate Saul? It would be really easy to say, I hate Saul. He keeps trying to kill me.
Probably because he was God's anointed.
Okay, he was God's anointed. David? Yeah. But what does that mean?
God chose him, and God is the one who began him.
Okay. Again, David's focus is on God. Whatever God is doing, that's what I should be doing. Is his attitude is, we're here because of God. He understands that. He understands we're in this position now because God got us here. Aaron.
It's probably a lot more than that. I don't think that David is making this up when he says, they were lovely and pleasant in their lives. I think David had a really good relationship for many years with Saul, definitely Jonathan. Jonathan and David's relationship was never strained.
No.
But even with Saul, he probably really truly loved him, like as a father, and played music in his court, sat at his table, ate dinner with him on a regular basis. They had conversations. I'm sure, he was a part of the king's court, part of the family.
I don't know how to phrase this. Unless we've been in a position, in an army, some sort of conflict, some sort of existential threat, I think it's difficult to be able to truly understand what's going on with these men. It was a weird time. It's nothing like anything we've known for many, many years. Although, this very nation was founded on war, right? I mean, that's how that happened. But I don't know if it's I don't want to call it special, but it is special when you see what it takes to be between men. At this point was men, okay? There wasn't women fighting in their battles. To know that we are men of war, I can kill you, I think, and you think you can kill me. And there's a certain amount of respect going on between this relationship. And we're going to see that later with Abner and Joab. And these generals who basically are taking over in some sense or one sense or another. And there is an extraordinary thing going on here that only military personnel would understand. And I'm not talking about men with guns. I'm talking about men who fight with swords and hand-to-hand combat. Even today, the wars that we have today are much different than back then. So, when I'm reading this, I try to get into the minds of these people and the sort of culture that they had. And the culture was, who has the most brute force? That's the guy who's going to lead. That's the way things were. That's the way people saw things. That was the reality of the day. So this is kind of what these brothers are. When they speak about each other, David, that's the level where David is. But beyond that, what Aaron was talking about, he loves these guys. He loved Jonathan, and we'll get to that point as well. And there is a deep love, not only on that personal level, but understanding that these people were willed by God to be part of Israel's history. Okay, what does that term mean? How have the mighty fallen? It's put in a question form, but there's an exclamation at the end of it. What does it mean? What does that mean? Gary.
Well, I was first thinking, one thing this made me think of is like during a funeral, you only hear good, positive things, almost always, or maybe always. And they're true. And I think everything that David said, he believed in his heart. And he did respect and love, as we said. But nothing negative. It just kind of reminded me, his song doesn't bring up anything negative at all.
No.
But everything he said was true.
What does that say about David? Again, David could have very easily hated Saul for all the things that he did, but he doesn't go there. That's a great point. He doesn't do it. He's just respectful. David stays humble. He stays respectful. And again, these were extreme times. We just can't understand it. In my mind, anyway, I couldn't understand what these people were culturally.
It says it, don't you think it displays the pathos of the moment and the tragedy of what's going on, how life is?
Yes.
And even though it's somebody that he didn't always agree with, he still sees the words anointed and the children of that person have gone.
We're going to see that same sort of attitude later when things happen in David's life. Even in the face of sin, we see the great remorse that he feels for it, the depths of emotion that happened, understanding that he has gone against God's will or something like that. And anytime he sees God's will resulting in something like this, it just makes him it makes him really upset. I don't know how else to put it. Okay, so yeah, that term's just basically, it's just the lament. It's just saying these people were so mighty and now they've fallen. And that to me was the big dirge, the big issue that he was having with the moment. Okay, verses 20 through 21. What is driving David's statement? In verse 20, and then in verse 21, David curses Gilboa. And what does the shield of Saul not anointed with oil mean? So it says, verse 20, tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, or the daughters of the Philistines will rejoice, the daughters of the uncircumcised will exult. O mountains of Gilboa, let not dew or rain be on you, nor fields of offerings. For there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul not anointed with oil. Now I know some other versions say something different, which is much closer. Why would he say, he's in the middle of cursing to a certain degree, certain things. Like he doesn't want anybody to brag about this, first of all. He says, don't brag about this. He doesn't want, don't talk about it so that people won't brag about the killing of Saul and Jonathan. Because he would take that, I'm assuming he would take it as a personal thing. But why would he say the shield of Saul not anointed with oil? I know there's other versions out there that are much closer to the reality of it. Anybody? Huh? Yeah, it's would God anoint a shield? He wouldn't necessarily anoint a shield, but he would anoint Saul, right? And he did have him anointed. And so it's almost like he's saying, the assumption would be that if you're anointed by God, that you're going to be protected by God. But because Saul was taken down, it's more like he wasn't anointed with oil now. And I think he understood that was the issue for many, many years already. Everybody understood that God had left. God left the presence of Saul. He wasn't advising Saul. So in just a few chapters before this, Saul is seeking God, and he ends up having to go to some medium because God wouldn't talk to him. And again, David is lamenting the turn of events where God had to turn his back on his friend Saul. And how it is that David can consider Saul still, I think, a friend or somebody that he loves is part of that foreshadowing of the Christ. Christ talks about loving your enemy. And wow, there's David doing it. He's absolutely practicing that. Okay, anybody have anything they want to, questions or anything up to this point? Okay, so 22 through 24 describes David's salutation concerning Saul and Jonathan. And I'm just asked that we would just describe what he is saying here. 22 through 24. He says, from the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, and the sword of Saul did not return empty. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and pleasant in their life, and in their death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you luxuriously in scarlet, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. What is he saying here, and why is he saying this, and what is the point behind all this? Steve?
Maybe thinking about the good things that he did, like he didn't shrink back, he did the best that he could when thinking about the situation that he was under.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. He did stop. He didn't fail. In the sense that he didn't run away. Right? Anybody else? Ida?
It's kind of puzzling to me because it took him a little while to get going.
Oh, this is true. Yes, that's true. A lot of times he was busy chasing after David, and then he would sometimes have to go fight a war in between the times when he was fighting David. So yeah, he was kind of ignoring. But this is kind of the contrasts. This is this culture of face, the culture of shame, of not shame, of saving face, and all of that. He's already talked about, don't let anybody talk about this because it's an insult to talk about it, to shame one of God's anointed. It's a shameful thing, so don't anybody speak about it. We don't want these enemies to exult over this. And then kind of to build that point up, he says, you may have killed these guys, but it's not like they were running away from you. They were fighting you. They killed a lot of you too, is kind of what he's saying. And there's a measure of saving some face, and I don't know how much glorifying, but at least lifting up his brothers that have fallen. He doesn't want them to die in a shameful way. He wants their memory to be one of courage and bravery and that kind of thing. Anybody want to add anything to that? Okay. Let's see. We don't have enough time to do this. I had some reading in here in 1 Samuel 18, where, and then in chapter 29 through 18, where it just basically talks about the relationship of David and Jonathan. And, we all remember the story. It wasn't that long ago. Jonathan is the son of Saul, who is seeking to kill David. But Jonathan just loves David. He loves him like a brother. He loves him more than, I don't know how to put it. He's like more than anything. It's so deep, and David goes to Jonathan and tells him, look, your dad's trying to kill me. What? Why is he trying to kill me? So they devise a plan to find out if Saul really is trying to kill him. And during that time, those 2 times, they make a covenant with each other to be friends to one another. And then the second time they make the covenant, Jonathan says to David, if I'm still alive when I return here to shoot those arrows, I want you to promise me that you're not going to go against my house. So what is he saying? He's saying, I get it, David. God is with you. He's not with my dad. You're going to be the king. And later he even says it. You're going to be king. Everyone knows this. And they have this tight relationship in spite of Jonathan's relationship with his dad. And this goes against their culture 100%. It is 100% against the culture. You belong to Benjamin, you belong to Saul, you are not to align yourself with David, would have been the thought. But Jonathan risked his own life for David's benefit. And that's the depth of which they loved each other. So I'm going to read this last part. And what is the motivation and meaning behind David's words when he says, how have the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle? Jonathan. So every time he says how the mighty have fallen, first it was how the mighty have fallen in battle, and then how the mighty have fallen, the weapons of war have perished. So you see this progression where not only have they fallen, but the things that they were relying on didn't save them. Jonathan is slain on your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You have been very pleasant to me. Your love for me was more wonderful than the love of women. What does that possibly mean? How have the mighty fallen and the weapons of war perished? why is David saying this, and what does he mean by this? What does it mean your love was better than the love of women? What does that mean? I find that hard to believe, but okay. 68 years, right? Matt and Lois have been married 68 years. Now, you want to talk about the love of a woman? Talk to Matt. I've been married with Robin. I've been married. Robin and I have been married about 40 years, almost 41. And you read something like this, and of course David isn't my age at this point. But what is he saying? Why would he say that? Yes, Gary.
Well, it may not be true with us, with a lot of us or all of us friends. Our best friend is our spouse. And
Okay.
has been for many, many years, our best friend.
Amen.
But it is possible for a man to have another man as a best friend. He still needs his wife, and he loves his wife. But there's a relationship and a communication and a love between two best friends.
Exactly. Ida?
I agree wholeheartedly with that statement, but how many wives did David have? And what
Okay.
we don't know exactly what the cultural setup was.
Okay.
I don't think he went, maybe he did, but I don't think he went to temple with all his wives. I don't know.
I'm glad you said that, because, my my thinking had to go that way eventually too. My first thinking was, when I'm thinking about it, I think about the relationship with the woman that God has given me, right? And I think, wow, there's a certain level of intimacy that you just don't talk. When I speak with my wife, we speak about things between us, and we know each other very well. And I think this is what David is saying. There may be things that he maybe spoke that he didn't, that he wouldn't say with other men that he might have said with his women, with his wives. And I think that is exactly the level that he's speaking of. And I think what Gary said is absolutely true, that these are, he doesn't say wives, he says women. And that's kind of what triggered me to think about the wife relationships back in that day, especially for a king, right? Betty.
I think back to, they trusted each other, they were loyal to each other, even to the point of death, placing their lives in the hands of each other. And when you know that you can do that, and you have that much trust, it's a wonderful bond. And I think they both trusted in God, and because of their trust in God, they were stronger, and that love stronger.
Wow. Yeah. Loyalty, and having a loyalty based on God. Okay. Exactly. It's very difficult to understand everything about what happened, in my mind anyway, about David and the taking of wives. And again, just like I can't understand what it means to be in David's skin because I'm not a warrior. I have no idea what that means. I have no idea what that means to have this existential threat over my head all the time and have people align themselves with me, and what that means to, that kind of relationship. Even more so, I have no idea what it means to be David and take wives. I don't know what that means. We do know that we don't hear a lot about David loving people specifically. We talk about loyalty. Was David takes a wife, Abigail. Was Abigail, she had a husband. Was she loyal to Nabal, her husband? Yes, absolutely loyal, even though Nabal was a kook, right? He wouldn't listen to anybody. He was stubborn and foolish and did all kinds of kooky things, but she was still loyal. And those are the kinds of things that David is iterating here, that all those things that go with those types of relationships is what he had with Jonathan, and more so maybe because he had that, plus they fought in battles together and did that sort of thing. Okay, anybody want to add anything to that? I just wanted to bring that up, especially about their past, because David is really, really upset about the death of Jonathan. I don't know, it doesn't say, but I almost make that assumption that he didn't think this was going to go down this way. He obviously didn't know what was going on. He was waiting for God to do whatever God was going to do. But he probably felt like this was going to be his lifelong companion, and he was taken away. Yes.
Just the context of their relationship. Jonathan was David's closest ally to Saul, who was trying to kill him. So that relationship was really close.
It was close. Jonathan was protecting him. And for all the right reasons too. Jonathan was seeking God, like what Betty was saying. Gary.
I can't help but think of how unsmooth David's life went.
Yes.
A lot of things happen where he might say, why is Saul trying to kill me? The adversity in David's life was extreme. Like you said, if you really get into it, and you're running and you're in caves, and you think about that everyday life, and you don't know exactly why. All the adversity, but where he went in his confusion, or it was always God.
Yep.
And Saul couldn't quite match up to that at all.
That was the dividing line between them, wasn't it? Saul, there was a point where Saul seeks God, and I spoke about this just a minute ago. He seeks after God, but God has already left that relationship, and that's, if there's a scary implication, it's that you turn against God enough, and at some point he just won't be there anymore. That's the scary part. Of course, we're not under that same sort of system. Okay, anybody else? Aaron.
Just that Saul could have accepted it. He could have accepted that God left him. He could have transitioned
Yes.
authority and power to David.
Yes.
There's a lot of different ways this could have happened if Saul would have just been humble enough to admit that God had made that decision.
I would add that if he had Jesus in his life, he might have seen that a little more clearly. And that is our great blessing today. And we get to see everything in hindsight, right? And we get to see the stubbornness of a man who doesn't want to let go of something that he thought should be his. And Jesus brings it to the forefront that none of it is ours anyway. And so we are super, super blessed to have all of these things revealed to us. And I think Saul is there just to show us, this is what can happen to anybody. Anybody else? Yes, Stephen.
God doesn't just give you one or two shots. It's amazing how many of these kings, especially in the 10 tribes that left, are told by a spiritual leader, but that God's taken if you figured out what he wanted from you, in whatever circumstance, whether they're worshiping in the wrong place, a bunch of things, and Saul was a good son. But Samuel actually comes to Saul, and when he was the Amalekites that he conquered, he second or third time you fail to obey, fail to understand, fail to obey. And I'm taking if you were to obey, your lineage would continue. So someone didn't. And so he'd been told directly, and so yeah, it was a big step for him to go to Caesar or somebody in him. And he knew God was going to listen to this. Throughout the Kings and Chronicles of the Kings, there's many Jehu, there's a bunch of kings that were given the opportunity to establish a lineage over God's people. A lot of them didn't do it very well.
Exactly. So God gives them opportunity throughout all of the scriptures, all of the Old Testament. And that's basically what we're going to see moving forward, especially after David leaves. But we'll see, probably next week, that their nation is divided. It begins in division. The divided kingdom after Solomon dies is nothing new. They're divided even before, and and then what they started practicing with false prophets and wanting to hear something that they wanted to hear and not the reality of things is just simply the cognitive dissonance of the day. We want to know this is going to be okay, even though we're going to do all this and it isn't what God wants. We don't care that they don't care. But that the message is not, oh, Jerusalem, oh, Israelites, they're just always messing up. The message is, I'm going to do that too if I'm not careful. That's what God's trying to tell me. If I don't pay attention to what God's saying and check myself every day, I will do the same thing. We're all capable, and this is what the New Testament brings out to us more than anything. Okay, we're not going to get too far into chapter 2. I would suggest that when you read chapter 2, remembering names is really important. I only say that because I'm really terrible at remembering who's doing what, and Abner, Joab, what does he do? What's that guy? I'm just terrible at that sort of thing. I don't read novels, that sort of thing, because that means you have to follow the story and be able to keep things in your mind and keep things straight. And when I do read a novel, it's not that I never have, I have to read it, and then I have to read it again. Maybe I'm ADHD or something, I don't know. But in order to get into the story, I have to read and reread and reread and reread. And that's just me. But it's important to understand a lot of things about what's going on right now. And when you get into chapter 2. And I think Danny will be back by then. But let's remember where everything is geographically, okay? Because there's going to be a civil war that's going to be essentially led by Abner. Who's Abner? Abner is related to Saul. He's either his cousin or his uncle, depends on who tells you what. But he's related to Saul, and he takes Ishbosheth and takes him, he takes him to Mahanaim, which is nowhere near where Saul was leading in Gilead. And so the first part of the next chapter, we're going to see David inaugurated by Judah. Judah, let's remember where Judah and Benjamin were, right? Because Saul was a Benjamite. They're right next to each other. And in fact, many of the maps show Jerusalem in Benjamin. So when we see in the future of their history, the issues with the Benjamites and all that sort of thing, they believe that they had this right to that. Anyway, we're going to see this sort of a real insurrection happen when Abner takes Ishbosheth to Mahanaim, which is way outside of where everything is, and he tries to start this different rule. Okay, anybody Any questions or before we? Okay, thank you.